Hi. Hello. Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Friday Junior. What is up? How's everyone doing? Yay. Yay. Okay. I see. Let me go back. Hello. Welcome to all the viewers, subscribers, members, haters, trolls, bullies, etc. Hello. Good to see you all. Let me see. Let's take roll. Who's gonna get detention today? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Are we good? I'm getting to the comments. I saw Corso. Hey Corso, good to see you. I saw Yashira. Hello, Dial Up Dreamer. Good to see you. Pumpkin, I see you're new here. Hello, welcome, Pumpkin. I saw beautiful Mary. I saw my girl Dee Dee. Hello, Dee Dee. Hello, Pamelia. Hello, good to see you. I know I was missing someone. And hello, my Gypsy Tarot. Good to see you. Member for 2 months, but friend for much longer than that, I believe. So thank you for being a supporter. Thank you. Hello, beautiful Sarah. At least you'll be able to read the chat because I have my glasses on. Yep, okay. Now that we have taken roll, we're close to finishing Sidney Powell trial. We didn't cover every single minute of it, but we covered the most important testimonies. We're doing closing arguments tonight, and tomorrow we will end it. And before we get started, I just want to, say again, we have been covering this case for about a week and a half now, and I appreciate you guys for sticking around. And I do want to just say, that my condolences go out to Brenda Powell's family and also Sydney's, whether she was struggling from mental illness or not. And whatever our opinion is, I still want to, send my condolences out that the family has to deal with 2 tragedies at a time of not knowing or knowing that someone's dealing with mental health issues and then losing someone at the hands of that person too. So I just want to say that, we've been covering it. It's about Sydney, the trial, the charges, but we do want to remember Brenda Powell and keep her in mind, and my condolences go out to her family again, as I say. So let's get started. We are going to cover closing arguments. It's going to be good. Tomorrow we will be finishing up with sentencing, and then Saturday we'll be starting. I have 3 lives scheduled for Saturday. I know. It's a lot, but new cases, new stuff. So I'm very excited to finish this, just to see the end result. And again, she gets a possibility at a second trial this year, or a plea deal. Hello, Barrywood. Good to see you. Good to see you, Barry. Thank you for being here. I saw someone else pop in here. Griselda. Hello, beautiful Griselda. All right, enough of me yapping away. Let's get started. We are going to cover state closing arguments first.
To reflect on your patience as a jury. This case has lasted almost 3 weeks. There's been decisions made by both counsel in order
What do you mean, Pumpkin?
Organize the best we can in order to present this case. And we do recognize that took a toll on your time, your ability to go about your daily life, and that doesn't go unnoticed. So we do appreciate your patience as both parties have worked diligently to present this case.
I'm so excited to watch this.
We first entered this courtroom to begin the trial, and I stood right here at this podium.
Love you too, Gypsy Tarot.
And I explained what the state believes the evidence is going to show. And more importantly, I stressed about what this case is about. And I still think it's important to take a moment here and remind you of that. There's been a lot of testimony. You've seen a lot of evidence. You've seen a lot of video and reports. It can be easy to set things aside or fall for distractions. And I'm going to ask you to not do that, to really take each piece of evidence as it is and take your time with it. You're going to be asked to decide whether or not the state met its burden, and that burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. And further, you're going to be asked to decide what I refer to as the core of this case when we started. And that core is whether or not Ms. Powell, at the time of the offense, was suffering from a serious mental disease, and she wasn't able to know the wrongfulness of her actions. Now, Attorney Don Malarczyk, in his opening statements that day, he came up here and he said that this case comes down to one question. It comes down to why. And I'm here to tell you that is not
Michelle.
the question.
Hello, my
The
lord.
question is not why. You're going to get the law from the court, and I can tell you, you're not going to see the word why in there. Why did this happen? Because that's not the law. The state has no burden to provide motive, and insanity does not exist simply because there's no why. It might be hard to understand or hard to comprehend why, but that doesn't equal insanity. You're still left with the core question whether or not Miss Powell was suffering from the mental disease, which was severe, and whether or not she knew the wrongfulness of her actions. That's it. And ladies and gentlemen, when you look at all the evidence that's in front of you, step by step, the state believes that you're going to have your answer to those questions and that you're going to be able to find Miss Powell guilty for what she did on March 3rd of 2020. So I know I thank you for your patience, but I'm going to ask you to be patient a little bit longer because I want to work through some things. And I want to talk about the law that you're going to be presented with. I want to talk about the state's evidence and what we believe it shows. And I also want to talk about what defense has presented because, as we mentioned before, this is a unique case where part of that burden shifts to them. And we're going to address that. And I first want to talk about, as I mentioned, the law. And I know when I first started, we talked, a lot of this is answered for us. We know this took place in Ohio. We know it was Summit County. And we also know, because nobody's fighting this, that Miss Powell committed these acts on March 3rd. Defense counsel, defense, they're not denying that. So a lot of this is there for you, but the state still holds a burden. And we hold that burden proudly because it is a serious burden. We must, through our evidence, show that these charges and the elements in there are proven beyond reasonable doubt.
Again, keep in mind so we can talk after. Do you think this is legit? That she does have insanity? That was what she was diagnosed with, schizophrenia? Do you believe she should get a second chance at a trial? Or do you believe she's just evil?
And the first charge is the count of
now
murder,
that you've heard all the facts.
and that Miss Powell did purposely cause the death of her mother, Brenda Powell. And you're going to be presented with another
Hello,
charge
Laura.
of murder
Good to see you.
in count 2. And I know that might be a little bit confusing. Why does the state have 2 charges of murder? Well, in the state of Ohio, murder can occur under different legal circumstances. And in this case, our position is that she did cause the death of her mother, Brenda, as a proximate result of committing or attempting to commit a violent felony, felonious assault. Now, what that means is you may not believe that Miss Powell wanted to or meant to kill her mom, but the evidence still shows that she did cause harm, physical harm to her mom by the use of a frying pan and a knife. And because of those actions, Brenda passed away. That meets what we refer to as felony murder, the second theory of murder. So distinguish the two. The first theory is, or the first charge of murder is, she meant to kill her mom and she did so with purpose. The second is she meant to hit her mom or strike her mom with those weapons, and that action led to the death of her mother. You're also going to be presented with count 3. And that we just talked about this, that she knowingly caused or attempted to cause physical harm. She knowingly hit her mom with that frying pan, proceeded to stab her with the knife. And those were the dangerous weapons she used in that. And lastly, you're going to be presented with count 4, that she did alter with purpose to impair the value of that evidence. That Miss Powell, after that murder was done, after Brenda was attacked, after she was hit, and after she died, that entire house became a crime scene. And Miss Powell took the next step in breaking that back window, immediately altering available evidence that would have been there for the investigation. Tampering with evidence. Now, I'll stress it again, and I know it might be exhausting. The law is going to come from the court. This PowerPoint is kind of a guide, but the law is going to come from Judge McLaughlin. She'll provide it in your jury instructions, and I ask that you follow that. And these questions, these 4 charges, they've already been answered for you. Nobody's arguing that Miss Powell didn't commit these crimes. The argument goes down to one issue, NGRI, not guilty by reason of insanity. We just talked about it. At the time of the offense, that is important. Ms. Powell did not know, because of a severe mental disease, the wrongfulness of her actions. Now that burden falls on the defense by a preponderance of the evidence. That's what they presented to you. Now, in order to reach your decisions,
my heart breaks for
on
this
what
case. It
the
really
state has
does.
presented as its charges, and also NGRI, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing I asked you a few weeks ago. Follow the evidence. But I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm going to agree with Attorney 𝗻𝗂 that you should also follow the science, as he said, because it's the state's belief that by following the evidence, by following the science, it doesn't add up. Ms. Powell was not suffering from a severe mental disease at the time of the murder, and she did know the wrongfulness of her actions.
We saw it. We saw the window. She was dating someone, which we found out later. She lied for months. She was living in a hotel room. There's so much we saw, right? So again, it's hard, but I also know what it's like when someone is dealing with mental health issues. So I'm a little stuck on that, and it makes me sad.
The evidence shows
for
that,
some reason,
and the science supports it. And I want to talk about the defense's case. You got to hear from a few of their witnesses, family members, friends, teachers, and you got to hear from a series of doctors. And I want to break that down.
We don't know, right? Everyone deals with mental health issues differently.
Excuse me.
It's not all black and white.
First, we heard from Mrs. Betsy Brown. Mrs. Betsy Brown is Brenda's mother, and she's 𝐶𝑦dney's grandmother. And there is absolutely zero doubt that Mrs. Brown loves and cares deeply for Miss Powell, for 𝐶𝑦dney. From the very moment she learned of her daughter's murder, she was there to support her. She met her at the hospital. She helped post her bond. She took her in to live with her and her husband at the 100-acre farm that they own. She provided her housing, assistance, access to the animals. But when it comes to answering the ultimate question of this case, Mrs. Brown can't provide any evidence to that. That's not her fault. It's that the evidence we're asking you to look at stems to the moment of the murder, the moment of the crime. Mrs. Brown just gives us insight into Miss Powell's current life, that she's going to her appointments, that she's taking medication, but no real insight into the evidence as to what Miss Powell's mindset was at the time of the murder.
She had no prior mental health issues either that we know of and that her family allegedly claims, but I believe there had to have been something there if she has schizophrenia.
And the same goes in a way with Miss Amanda Brown.
Oh, sane. Good to see you.
High school
Sane.
friend, a college classmate of
made
𝐶𝑦dney.
it.
Another person who openly admitted that she cares for 𝐶𝑦dney. She cares to see what happens here. But she could never identify any moment where she had serious concerns that Miss Powell was having hallucinations, that Miss Powell was blacking out, that Miss Powell was talking to people and things that don't exist. Yeah, she reflected on a moment where a panic attack existed. And the state's not making light of it.
Yes, Pumpkin. We are talking about that case.
At some point in her junior year of high school, Miss Powell had some concerns regarding a project, and she voiced those concerns.
Hello, Tasman.
But Miss Amanda Brown testified that at no point did she think it was so concerning to report it to the Powells. At no point did she report it to the therapist or to a counselor or to the school nurse. It was anxiety around a high school project. You also heard from Mrs. Catherine Milligan. This is 𝐶𝑦dney Powell's teacher through a few years in high school.
I truly believe anything can set anyone that is dealing with mental health issues off. I do believe that's possible. Because Laura asked, does schizophrenia present itself during the teenage college age? Yeah, that's an age range, but I feel like it could appear with anything, right? Whether it's PTSD or trauma. I agree, Pumpkin. Good comment.
Again, she's known 𝐶𝑦dney for a long time. She cares for her. She recognized that she was a great student, and we're not denying that. The grades speak for themselves. Her friends and teachers speak for that. But Mrs. Milligan, just as the other few witnesses to start, cannot provide any insight to the core of this question, whether or not she was suffering from a severe mental illness. Because Mrs. Milligan cannot recall a single moment where was she concerned about these hallucinations, concerned about schizophrenia. She again brought up the incident where Miss Powell suffered from an anxiety attack, a panic attack while in school. A memory that she herself couldn't remember. She had to be reminded of it by Dr. Reardon. And she told you that in that moment where Miss Powell described to her as sudden blindness, she didn't find it serious enough to report it to anyone. Not the school, not the therapist, not the family. In that moment, Miss Powell left her chemistry classroom instead of going to that chemistry teacher. She sought out her favorite teacher, explained what was going on, and through Mrs. Milligan, she was able to get out of that project at that moment. That's all Mrs. Milligan can
I see you,
provide us.
Pumpkin.
And I'm not saying ignore it. I'm saying listen to every one of these witnesses, because they do provide us some insight. And we'll talk about that.
Don't behave.
Now, we also, as you know, you heard from an array of doctors. Doctors who were sought out by defense, psychologists who provided their opinion on this case. And I want to remind you that you're going to have these records. You're going to have every record from every doctor who testified there, as well as some of the medical records that they reviewed. And I'm going to ask you right now to spend your time with them, to read them, to review them, to note them, to really focus on these reports, because we hope that in doing that, you're going to recognize some issues. Evidence that's ignored or never addressed, conclusions made by each and every one of them without supporting outside evidence other than Miss Powell, the defendant's own statements. Look for
who's
this
getting
information.
detention.
It's there, and we're going to talk about it.
Who's getting a spanking?
Each
Just
of
kidding,
these
just
doctors,
kidding.
Dr. Reardon, Dr. Swales, Dr. Timmy, they met with Miss Powell at different times. Some earlier on, some later on. The reports vary in time frames, years or 3 years after. And each of them reach conclusions. And the main conclusion that they find is that Miss Powell suffered from schizophrenia. And they each find the conclusion that she's not guilty by reason of insanity. But there's also a series of other conclusions made by each of them that don't make sense. They themselves compete with each other. They contradict each other. One of the only things these doctors shared was their ability and decision to ignore certain evidence that would have given them insight to major moments in Miss Powell's events on March 3rd and the weeks leading up to. They had access to insight to see what she was doing before, doing during, and doing after. And each of them failed to answer these questions. Now, I don't mean to minimize their reports, because these doctors are well trained, they're well educated, they're all experts in this field. But I just, in a brief summary of what kind of the core of what they came up with. Dr. Reardon, that this was a full-blown psychotic break. Dr. Swales, that throughout time, Miss Powell was building these systems. This onset of system was coming towards her and finally manifested on the 3rd. And Dr. Robert Belcher Timmy, I'll refer to him as Dr. Timmy, flashes of reality. Each of these compete with each other because they want you to believe different stories, different theories that will ultimately reach their main conclusion. And I want to talk about each of these doctors. First, we're going to look at Dr. Reardon. This is the first doctor you heard from. He provided, I'm not going to go over everything.
The doctor I talked about in
but I am
part
going to take some time to review some of the things he used in order to make his determinations. He speaks with a high school teacher and a high school friend. And just like Attorney 𝗟𝗡 approached Dr. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, he didn't reach out and call Lauren Curry. He didn't reach out and call any of the friends she was with, any of her other roommates during that time. None of them did. He reaches out to somebody who hasn't seen her in years, can't even remember an event from 6 years ago. He also reviews the evaluation. There's 2 evaluations. He reviews the first one from Dr. Swales, and in his own report, he's very open about this. Dr. Reardon disagrees with Dr. Swales, because there's moments where Dr. Swales relies on the initial test at the hospital when Sydney's first brought in. Dr. Swales acknowledges that there's concerns of malingering, feigning symptoms, excessive number of infrequent responses. Dr. Reardon, he completely disagrees. His conclusion is, well, it also could have been acute psychosis, and I'll just take it for that. Dr. Reardon reviews the medical examiner's report, and you're going to see this language that he uses. He refers to the medical examination, the photos and the crime scene photos he sees as a frenzied attack, uncontrolled violence, somebody who is nearly berserk. Now, I'm not going to pretend that those photos were easy to look at. It's a difficult crime scene.
We saw those
extreme
in part
violence there. We know that. You've seen that.
Trigger warning.
But in almost every murder,
you missed it.
There's violence. Somebody has lost their life with the use of violence. And he says that it's frenzied. But I want you to look at the evidence. I want you to hear from the detectives that testified, the crime scene photos. It wasn't frenzied. Those were isolated attacks to Miss Brenda Powell's face, head, skull.
Mm-hmm.
The stab wounds were isolated to her throat only. This was not frenzy across her body. There was a purpose in this attack.
Shout out to my
girlfriend. He says
there
that whoever
too.
did this was in a near berserk state of mind, but completely ignores that during this berserk state of mind, Miss Powell twice turns to the phone and holds conversations with others. That during this berserk moment, she's able to stage a crime scene. And Dr. Reardon, he also reviews her medical records, the initial ones from SUMA, from Akron Children's Cleveland Clinic. But what he doesn't acknowledge is that in those initial reports, there are concerns from some of these doctors that there might be some malingering symptoms. There might be some feigning symptoms or things that don't add up. To use patience in order to figure this out, to look at this with caution for malingering, to not rule out malingering until it can be tested. He doesn't acknowledge those. He says, yeah, those exist, but it could also mean acute psychosis. And I think it's important, I don't mean to sidetrack here, but we learned a lot of this from Dr. 𝗟𝗏 that at the moment on March 3rd, March 4th, March 5th, when Miss Powell was brought into the hospital, she is a patient first. That is those doctors' priority.
A patient.
To look
what
after
about
her
Brenda?
medically.
Brenda Powell.
At the time she comes in, they don't know what happened on Scudder Drive. They don't know that she's a possible suspect. They think she's a victim. They don't know that she's made statements to police. They don't know about the school. They don't know about the phone calls. All they're going off of is Miss Powell's inability to answer their questions. That's all they have. And at that time, treating her as a patient first, they were concerned that she couldn't answer questions and she was acting catatonic. That was their priority in providing her care. But in doing so, they also recognized some concerns that she's still able to react to some questions. She's still able to recognize certain situations, but Dr. Reardon just sets that aside. It's still acute psychosis, even though there was concerns. Now, he reaches a series of conclusions here, and I talked to you about a psychotic break. Dr. Reardon says that during the week of February 24th through 3/3, Miss Powell was completely delusional in a full-blown psychotic break.
Delusional?
But he doesn't provide any evidence to support that.
Hello.
He tells you that there's a delusion that Miss Powell still thinks she's enrolled at Mount Union. But if she's still enrolled at Mount Union and believes she's a student, why does she not go to class?
She had a psychotic episode for like 3 months, 4 months, and went to class. She was literally showing up in class, taking notes, and she wasn't even on the roster. They weren't even calling her name for attendance. What up, YouTube Streets? Good to see you. Shout out to you. I don't know.
Why is she not
My
emailing
opinions are
professors
mixed.
for homework? Why is she not contacting
I'm stuck.
her RA, hey, my name's not on my dorm. Because there is no delusion. Miss Powell knows she's not a student there. And she's
like
just not
5
ready to
months.
face that truth and tell those around her. She's not ready to disappoint them. She doesn't have control over it. She's trying to buy herself time. Dr. Reardon talks about isolation, that Miss Powell is starting to withdraw from her friends, from her school. But the only way to see that is to try to figure out what was going on during that week for Miss Powell in the months subsequent. And Miss Powell, she can't remember that, she states. So what other resource could he look at? The cell phone, as Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗏 did? But he doesn't. He doesn't open up the cell phone. He doesn't read the data. He doesn't read the text message or the activity. He just says that she's isolating with no supporting facts as her doing so.
It is.
And yeah, there's no doubt that Miss Curry went in there and Miss Brown came in here and they testified that, yeah, Sydney was a little bit withdrawn. She seemed like something was bothering her. We're not denying that. Something very heavy is bothering Miss Powell. She's kicked out of Mount Union and she doesn't know how to tell anyone. She's not ready to tell anyone. Those
that big of a
stressors
deal?
are real. And yeah, maybe she doesn't want to go to the sorority meetings because her dues are owed. She's going to be questioned by the sorority sisters. Hey, Sydney, you're not a student here. You're not on our roster. She's not isolating because of a schizophrenic, psychotic break. She's isolating because she's trying to buy time. Dr. Reardon goes further and he says that, yeah, we recognize normal behavior through Miss Powell, the bachelor party, the booking of hotels, the communicating with friends, but the whole time she's actually decompensating. But there's no evidence of decompensating because all we can see is through the text message, through Miss Powell's own actions, is that she's still participating in everyday
I need
life.
you all to leave your
She's
DNA
still
on the like
communicating
button.
with mom and dad. She's still addressing her issues
DNA.
with the university. She's still telling Lauren, getting up with Lauren every morning to go to
Scientific
class.
purposes.
Where's the decompensation? He can't point to anything. You got to see a portion of the body-worn camera, 90 seconds of edited clips that Dr. Reardon
We saw
watched
so
with
much
us.
of this too.
And there's hours and hours and hours of clips from this incident, of body-worn camera footage, I should say. So we saw a brief 90 seconds with Dr. Reardon. And in that 90 seconds, the edited clips, catatonia, absolutely. And there's no doubt, we saw the same clips that you did, that
Yay!
Miss Powell has completely shut down. But what Dr. Reardon fails to acknowledge is the moments before she tips over, the moments before she stops talking. Because when police arrive, she's immediately able to communicate with them. Right. Is my mom okay? Is she going to be okay? There was a break-in. We heard a bang. She's immediately telling her story. And when Officer Jackson gets to her, are you hurt? No. Okay, well, let's go outside. I want my dad. I want my dad. And when Mr. Powell shows up, Dad, there was a break-in. There was a break-in. We heard a bang. She's communicating. She even tells Officer Jackson when he tries to sit her down, well, you told me to sit on the ground. She's listening. She's responding.
Hello, Augie, my beautiful. I miss you.
And finally, at some point, the shock catches up to her. She has just gone through something brutally horrific, the murder of her mom at her own hands. It catches up. She shuts down. But that catatonia does not automatically mean that she didn't know the wrongfulness of her actions that day. And Dr. Reardon, he does a psychological autopsy. That's what he referred it to as. And it's something we've heard before. And this is where he comes up with the whole theory that she's in a full psychotic break the week of February 24th to February 23rd. Yet everyone in her life doesn't recognize it. Nobody notices it in her text messages, in her sharing of memes, in her communication with friends, in her hangout with friends. The day of the murder, just over an hour before she take her mom's life, in what Dr. Reardon says is a full psychotic break, she's able to communicate with her dad, Mr. Stephen Powell. So much that he returns to work, later telling police that she was 100% fine.
We
But
saw
Dr.
that.
Reardon wants you to believe that that was in the midst of a
This is
full-blown
wild.
berserk
Wow.
psychotic break.
It's wild.
No one else noticed. And Dr. Reardon, just as every other doctor, was presented with the ultimate question. And they gave their answer of NGRI, but they were also confronted. Well, first, let me say this, because Dr. Reardon himself, he wasn't confronted until Prosecutor Stano stood up here and asked him, well, what do you make of Miss Powell's actions during the murder? Dr. Reardon keeps saying, my focus was on the 3.5 minutes of the murder. But when confronted by that, well, during that 3.5 minutes, she answers the phone twice. How does that make sense if she's in a full-blown psychotic break? And right here in front of you, right at this witness stand, Dr. Reardon, without evidence, without support, without anything, gave you 2 brand new theories. Well, maybe she thought she was her mom. Well, maybe she thought she was killing herself. That's not in his report. That's not anywhere. He came up with that because there was no answer for this, the actions of Ms. Powell during this time. And when you read Dr. Reardon's report, not once, not a single mention of her actions during the murder, of the staging of the crime scene, of the calls to dad, of the calls to Mount Union, of lying to the police. He completely ignores it. Full-blown psychotic break. But no one noticed. Dr. Swales, he meets with Ms. Powell 2 times. 2021, again in 2023, and he recognizes that throughout her life, there's an onset of symptoms that were missed by family members. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to say that the symptoms are clear as day and everybody should know if their child's suffering through something like this. That's not what I'm here to address this as. But what he says is that these onsetting symptoms, he learns of them through one person and one person only.
Oh, I love you guys.
Miss Powell. Every symptom.
I love every single one of you.
Child is reported by.
Can I hug and kiss every single one of you? Can we kiss? Can we hug? Is that too much? Is that too much? Okay, well, good. I hope it is.
And there's zero cooperation. There's zero
I hope it is.
Support other than anxiety, panic attack, and depression. And we'll talk about that. But there's no evidence outside of Ms. Powell's statements that there's ever been hallucinations. And she states in herself that these hallucinations started when she was 11 or 12, which from the science, even the own doctor said, yeah.
We didn't see that though.
It's possible, but that itself is rare. That this
11 or 12.
This must be a rare occasion. And Dr. Swales,
Okay,
he's able to come up with a series, and you'll see these in his report, a series of conclusions of what she was going through,
even you,
what her symptoms were, false beliefs, that people were talking about her, that the FBI was listening to her phone. She reports auditory and visual hallucinations. She heard people say, Sydney, you're no good. She saw, he told you, he sat there and he said, she told me that she saw flames coming from her hands. Isn't that insane? That was his quote. He says that she told him she had disorganized thoughts, that she couldn't keep her mind straight. She tells him that she would speak nonsense to her friends, and her friends were always like, Sydney, why are you acting so strange? All of this, all of these symptoms, they come from Miss Powell over a year later. They don't come from friends. They don't come from family. They're not supported by anyone in her life. It's Miss Powell's reporting. And Dr. Swales, just as I said, he's also confronted with the question that you have to answer. Was she suffering from a mental disease? And whether or not she knew the wrongfulness of her actions. And he sat there and he just said to Attorney 𝗟𝗡, she was out of her mind. That's all he said. He didn't expand on it. He didn't give reason. He just said, she's out of her mind. And he also addressed this moment that Ms. Powell suffered from dissociative amnesia, but ignores the fact that she was still able to answer the phone during all this, to pretending to being Brenda, to returning her call to Mr. Powell and saying, yeah, mom's fine. She's talking to Mount Union. that during this amnesia, she's able to break the window and stage a crime scene. But he wants you to believe that during all this, she's out of her mind.
I have to say, I do have so much love for the Powell family, and those are personal reasons. But again, my condolences to the Powell family, Brenda Powell's family, Sidney Powell's family, all of them.
And I think it's important to note that the amnesia he talks about, the disassociation, that's not entirely true, because we get a little snapshot if you look at all the medical records of all the different reportings that Miss Powell has told.
The break-in shows she knows what she did. We saw the pictures too.
The police arrive. She immediately tells them there's been a break-in. And that story continues all the way into the hospital. Even when she's catatonic, she's still mumbling, "Get out of the house, get out of the house," supporting her original plan that there was a break-in. And when she's charged with that crime, she now starts to state that she cannot remember. She remembers going to the basement because the voices were too loud. And when she woke up, the knife was in her mom's chest and she was trying to stop the bleeding. Well, that's not the last story, because then she tells Dr. Swales years later that, "No, I actually blacked out when I went in the basement and I don't remember anything until I woke up in the hospital." It's not dissociative amnesia. She's selecting, again, her own reporting. What best fits the situation to protect myself? And you heard lastly from Dr. Timmy, who met with Sidney Powell in December of 2022, again in January of this year, 2023. And just like Dr. Reardon, Dr. Timmy wants you to believe two things: that Miss Powell was suffering from a delusion while she was at Mount Union. The delusion that she was still a student. But if she, again, I say this, if she thinks she's still a student, she's not going to classes. She's not responding to emails. She's not accessing her class schedule. But he also goes further and say that during this time, her symptoms became so severe that she was so depressed she couldn't leave the room. Well, we know that's not true because she did leave the room. But it also begs the question, if she thinks she's a student, then why would she be depressed of getting kicked out? She can't have the delusion and the depression.
Can two things be true at once?
Yes. She knows she's been kicked out.
What about this? Mental health issues.
He wants to give you both options. And that's what he did here. And Dr. Timmy, he refers to flashes of reality. That during this time period, Miss Powell was having flashes into reality and flashes outside of her reality. And he supports that with, unfortunately, no evidence, because we get a snapshot into what Miss Powell's doing during these weeks. She's keeping up her lie. She decides that at times she needs to stay at a hotel because she can't go home until the 4th.
Okay, Brad, got you. I'll cover it.
She supports all of her lies. She continues these.
I'll give you a shout out.
She backs them up to make sure they last.
Thank you for letting me know.
But he says, well, outside of that moments, she's actually flashing out of reality, but gives not a single evidentiary line or moment where she's flashing out of reality. He just says it's happening when we don't see it. And I don't want to sidetrack here, but I think it's important to take a moment and remind us where evidence comes from. And that's that witness box. Because there were a lot of questions that, okay, well, we know Miss Powell stayed in the hotel for a certain time. Well, where was she the other day? Well, she must have been sleeping in her car. I want to remind you, there is no evidence of that. Nobody knows that. Nobody can account for that. It's never been reported where she was sleeping. So no matter how many times it was asked, maybe she was sleeping in her car. Yeah, maybe. But it's important to remember where the evidence comes from. That's that witness box, not this podium where I'm standing, not for me, not for Prosecutor Stano, not from Attorney Malarczyk at that podium. Each of the doctors, I'll get back to that because I want to finish with Dr. Timmy here. Because one of the things that stood out in his report, again, I want you to read it. I want you to take your time with it. Is in this report, he comes at Dr. 𝗷𝗶𝗸𝗲. And that's part of his job. We're not passing any judgment. But he says, Dr. 𝗷𝗷𝗃 fails to provide an alternative theory as to why Miss Powell did this. And I want to remind you, that is not the law.
Oof.
Providing theories as to why is not the measurement for insanity. We may not always know why something happens, but that does not equal NGRI.
Not guilty by reason of
The
insanity.
question remains within the law whether or not she was suffering from the severe mental disease and whether or not she knew the wrongfulness of her actions. And that same question is presented to Dr. Timmy. Dr. Timmy, did she know the wrongfulness? No, she didn't. Well, Dr. Timmy, how do you explain then that she was able to
pull up
lie to her dad, lie to Mount Union,
slideshow,
stage a crime scene, lie to the police? Well, he says those are moments where she flashes back into reality. But I want you to compare that to Dr. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲. How does somebody who is in what they call a full psychotic break able to immediately snap back into reality upon a phone call and immediately come up with a story that there was a break-in? Because she's not snapping in and out of reality. Her reality is there in front of her, that she's taking her mother's life and she needs to get out of it. She doesn't have time to create another lie, so she thinks on her feet impulsively.
We're gonna look at the photos in a minute.
Reality. That doesn't make sense.
I'm gonna pull them back up.
How can she flash out of it and then immediately come back and decide, well, I need to break a window right now?
Okay, Dee Dee.
And there was a lot of questions about staging a crime scene, and I want to address that.
Write it down.
We know that there's a time frame that this murder takes place. 27 minutes, I believe, before the police arrive and the phone calls that happen. And I think it's important to remember what Mount Union, Mr. Frazier and Miss Gaffney told us, that they called the Akron Police Chief's Department and they reported that they were concerned that something happened on Scudder Drive. At this time, nobody but Mount Union, Miss Powell, and the Akron Police Department know what's going on or what might be going on. But for Detective Dietz calling Mr. Powell, Miss Powell never would have known the police were coming because she learned that from her dad. Dad gets a call from his friend, Detective Dietz. Hey, something's going on. And being a good dad, he takes that step and he calls home. What is going on? And I'm not knocking Detective Dietz. He's being a good friend. There's some concerns. And that's the first time that Miss Powell ever realizes the police are on their way. That's when she comes out with the first lie. Because before that, seconds before it, she tells Dad, no, Mom's fine. She's on the phone. Well, Cindy, the police are coming. There's the lie. I have to protect myself. Dad, there was a break-in. She's now hysterical. So we don't know what Miss Powell would have done but for learning that the police were coming. A lot of the doctors were asked, well, if she was staging a crime scene, why wouldn't she clean the blood off of herself? That doesn't make sense. Yeah, it does. If you're staging a crime scene that there was a break-in, why would you clean the blood off? Your theory is that you were helping your mom. Of course you're covered in blood. To wash off the blood wouldn't make sense if there was a break-in.
Right. Okay, we're gonna pause because I can't. I need to show you guys these pictures for those of you who missed. Oh, let me see if I can make it bigger because it wouldn't load. Oh, there we go. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, baby. Okay. Schizophrenia is a chronic severe mental disorder that affects the way a person thinks, acts, and expresses emotions, perceives reality, and relates to others. Schizophrenia isn't as common as other major mental illnesses, affecting less than 1% of the U.S. adult population, but it can be one of the most chronic and disabling. The severity of schizophrenia varies from person to person. Some people have only one psychotic episode, while others have many episodes during their lifetime. In between psychotic episodes, you may lead a relatively normal life. Still, others may have trouble functioning over time, with little improvement between full-blown psychotic episodes. Schizophrenia symptoms seem to worsen then improve in cycles known as relapses and remissions. We covered this on part 1, so you're going to have to go back and watch part 1 for all of it. But I want to, hold on, I want to share. Hold on. I'm trying to show you guys the pictures, the crime scene photos. Hold on. Because we have them all, thanks to my girl Paula. My girl Paula, maybe I won't be able to show you after all. I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with my PowerPoint. I had issues with it last time. Because it was too many pictures. It was like, it's not working for me. Oh. Hold on, let me see if I can get it. Not us troubleshooting. Not us troubleshooting this. Okay, well, I'll play this and then let me get it up and then I'll share the pictures with you, the crime scene photos. We have them all. So, wait. Let me pull them up and then I'll share with you guys. I promise. I keep pulling up the wrong screen. Give me a second. I'll pull them up and I'll show you guys.
They're asking you to believe an array of conclusions.
They're wild.
And these conclusions, they compete with themselves. They want you to believe these conclusions, but they refuse to give you any real supporting evidence outside of Ms. Powell's own statements in order to believe that she suffered from schizophrenia. And in order for them to believe that, they had to first believe Ms. Powell.
I'll show you after he's done.
Reporting symptoms that she gave them. They ignored the scientific evidence that points to the early concerns of malingering. Yes, I want to pause here. I am not knocking these doctors. They are professionals. They're dedicated to their practice. They did the psychological tests that were needed at the time they met with Ms. Powell. Nobody had access to perform these tests early on when the murder first happened, as Dr. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 stated would have been best. And I'm not here to question those results of those tests, because
I'm glad you're here, Pantera. I missed you.
Procedure. But those tests can only give insight into Ms. Powell's malingering or fainting of symptoms years down the road. None of them can answer what was happening on March 3rd of 2020. They're stuck with only Ms. Powell's responses. And when presented with the fear or the fact that there might be some malingering concerns early on March 5th, March 6th, March 7th, they just say, well, yeah, it also could be acute psychosis. Yeah, but it also could be this. And they're asking you to do the same. And I'm going to remind you again, listen to the evidence, listen to the science. Their conclusions don't line up. But what does line up is this timeline, this access that you have to the evidence. And I'm not going to rehash everything. I've been talking a while. But we know that Ms. Powell's kicked out of Mount Union. And we know that the Powells, Mr. and Mrs. Powell, start to have some concerns around this time. Because we know that Mr. Powell at some point tries to pay his tuition and is unable to. When he confronts Miss Sydney Powell about it, she says, oh, there's just an issue, I'll get it fixed. Another lie to buy herself time. And we see in the text message that Miss Brenda Powell is starting to have some concerns. Sydney, why do I feel that you're always scamming us?
We saw that in the first line.
That situation. And then later she says, Sydney, what's this lie you're telling Dad about you working at the library? If you are working in the library, we don't have to give you any more money. Well, Miss Powell says, no, don't go that far. She's not working at the library. She's going to the library during the day because she has to pretend she's going to class. And Mr. Powell on the Life 360 starts to wonder, why is Sydney always at the library? Her response, another lie to buy herself time. Dad, I got a job there.
Wow.
But Brenda knows that's not true. What's this lie you're telling your dad about? The lie that she's built is starting to crumble. She needs to buy herself time, and she doesn't have those options.
Look at her.
And we know that on 3/3, Miss Powell goes home, and she's first confronted by Mr. Stephen Powell. He leaves his phone at work so he can get to her without her noticing. She's pulled in the garage. She confronts her at home. And this is the first time she voices her concern about school, but does not disclose to Dad that she's been kicked out. She's still hiding that lie. And Dad, in what the doctors say is a complete psychotic break, recognizes that Sydney is 100% fine. He returns to work, turning to his wife, Brenda, to get this situation figured out. Again, she's confronted by Brenda Powell. And we don't know what that conversation was.
We don't. We'll never know.
We know from Miss Powell's early statements that Mom gave her a hug and told her, I love you. But we also don't know because Sydney says she doesn't remember anything but the basement. We know that Brenda at some point calls Mount Union, and that phone call is interrupted by a thud. another thud, another thud, another thud, and screams from what Mount Union believes was Miss Sidney Powell. Miss Sidney Powell would continue to hit her mom with a cast iron skillet, a frying pan, and then she would proceed to stab her mom in the throat with a kitchen knife.
Oof. We're going to look at that knife too in a second.
During this attack, Miss Powell was interrupted by the phone call again. We've talked about it. She answers the phone to Mount Union pretending to be her mother.
She pretended to be her mother. Is that a psychotic episode or
a lie.
intentional?
She hangs up the phone. She's trying to buy herself time. But the phone doesn't stop ringing because now Mr. Powell has learned that something might be going on and the police are on their way. So he keeps calling. Miss Powell, trying to buy herself time, calls dad back. Yeah, everything's fine. No, it's not. Saying the police are on their way. And now we have to build another lie to protect ourselves. That's what Miss Powell's doing. And that's where she stages the crime scene.
Me too.
And she's interrupted by the police arriving very quickly. By the time she talks to dad and breaks the window and gets things organized, time's flying. And the police are there. And now she has to buy herself time by screaming, there's been a break-in, we heard a bang. Anything she can do to keep herself safe. Let's continue the lie. And you get insight into all of this. You have the body worn camera. Pictures. You have her statements. You have the report. Look at all of it. Mm-hmm. You can see the conscious decisions that Sydney's making the week before, the weeks before, the day of, all to ensure that the lie exists and she can buy herself time.
Hi, meow.
But when that phone call was answered by Brenda, the time had run out. She had no other options but to try to stop it. And that's what she did. And that resulted in Brenda Powell losing her life. Mm. You've heard a lot from me. You've heard a lot from the state, Prosecutor Stano, Attorney 𝗏𝗏𝗏, and all of our witnesses. We've talked about the
She's just looking down the whole time.
We've heard the story. It can get exhausting, I'm sure. But I want to take a moment and address somebody who we haven't been able to talk about that much, and that is Miss Brenda Powell. There's no doubt.
I said that at the beginning.
She was an absolutely dedicated mother, a dedicated child life specialist. She loved her family. She loved everything she was involved in. There's no denying that. And she was loved by everybody, her family especially. But Brenda Powell on March 3rd did lose her life in an extremely violent and brutal way. She lost the chance to grow old with her husband, Stephen. She lost the chance to watch Andrew graduate and build his life. She lost the chance to see what Miss Powell had available to her. She lost the chance to continue her bonds with her mother, with her family. She lost her life because of the impulsive decisions in order to protect herself that Miss Powell made. This lie was so heavy and so big, she just needed more time, and that's the action she took. Unfortunately, that action interrupted any of Miss Brenda Powell's future. I mentioned when I first came in this courtroom that this case is not, I don't even want to say that. This case is difficult. We're not going to hide that. It pulls on the emotions and the connections that each of us make as humans. It draws on our own experiences with struggles with mental health and relationships and those in our family. And I want to remind you that the state is aware of mental health. We acknowledge that. We acknowledge that even in Miss Powell, anxieties and depressions and concerns have existed, that this lie was a heavy burden. But I need to remind you that mental health is not insanity. The law controls that. And to say otherwise is insensitive to mental health. It's insensitive to those who struggle with schizophrenia. The law is specific when it addresses sanity, severe mental disease, and the inability to know the wrongfulness. It's okay for you to recognize someone's anxiety, someone's mental health issues, even Miss Powell's. I'm going to ask you to do that. It's okay to recognize the struggles in school and the fear of letting those down as heavy. But to relate these struggles to that of insanity, that does not line up, and it shouldn't line up. You must use the evidence that's available to you to understand what her mindset was at the time of the crime. Not well before, not well after, 3 years now, at the time of the crime. And there's a bridge here. And in order to enter this bridge, you're first going to have to ask whether or not Miss Powell suffered from serious mental illness. That bridge starts over here. And it's the state's position through the evidence, through Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗏, through Miss Powell's own statements and actions, she does not suffer from schizophrenia. In order for you to believe that, you have to believe the testimony of Dr. Reardon, Dr. Swales, and Dr. Timmy. But remember the limitations in their testimony, that their evaluations focus on the current status of Miss Powell, and they struggle to address the concerns during the murder. But let's say you meet that first problem. We'll acknowledge that. Let's say in this hypothetical, you agree that Miss Powell suffers from schizophrenia. Okay, you've entered the bridge. Well, now you need to cross the bridge. And in order to do that,
He's pretty
you
good.
need to decide whether or not she was suffering from that severe mental disease at the time of the crime. We talked with Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗏, and each of those doctors, many of the individuals who suffer from this mental disease are not violent. Many
True.
individuals who suffer from schizophrenia do not act out in this way.
True.
Just because you're schizophrenic does not mean you're insane for the purposes of the law. They're not hand in hand. There's a distinction there. But if you still believe that she was suffering from schizophrenic at the time of the crime, then you can walk to the other side of the bridge. And there you're confronted with whether or not she knew the wrongfulness of her actions. And there the evidence speaks for herself. Because the very moment before the murder, during the murder, after the murder, all of her actions say how much she knew that these were wrong. She knew that what she was doing was wrong, and at all costs, she tried to hide it. She was in control of her mind that day. She made these decisions to protect herself at all costs, to keep her lie from ever seeing light. And in that moment, the lie was coming true. Everyone was about to know, and she had no other options. So, ladies and gentlemen, these lies, they've come to light in this courtroom. They're presented to you through testimony, through evidence. On March 3rd of 2020, Miss Powell murdered her mother, Brenda. And if you follow the science, you follow the evidence, we believe that you will come to the decision that Miss Powell is guilty of that crime and that she was not suffering from a severe mental disease that prevented her from knowing that wrongfulness. Thank you.
Okay, so we got through the state. Now let me share. I got my sheet together. Now let me share the pictures. Trigger warning, crime scene photos. Here we go, baby. Thanks to my girl Paula at Thunder. So there's the house, trigger warning. This is the house where the crime happened. Can you guys see it? Can you see it? Can you see it? Sorry, I had to share because it was too big. Pause. The file was too big. Okay. Let me see. So there's one of the crime scenes. There's blood on the wall. I couldn't show all of them. I have like 700 of these pictures, but they were too much probably for YouTube. So there's one that's brutal. Blood everywhere. Another one, blood everywhere. I'm going through these pretty fast. That's the iron skillet and the knife that was used in the crime. More blood in the room, on the floor. That is the skillet and her phone and the knife that was used. The knife again. More blood on this is crime scene photos. So this is how brutal it was. That's the window where she staged the break-in, allegedly. She had her wounds on her hands, which you will see matched the window breaking. More window photos. Oh, that was the bloody cell phone. This was like, we saw this in the Kohberger case in the Idaho floor where the blood was like dripping down the walls. Wound scene, hand wounds. Her in the hospital. And this is who we want to keep in mind. At the end of all of those brutal photos, this is why we're here. Brenda Powell, we send our deepest sympathies to the loved ones of Brenda Powell who fell victim to the horrific events described in this case. Brenda Powell on the screen. I know, I'm so sad. But if you want to see those pictures again, go watch part 1. I have it all there. And so now let's move on. We're going to listen to the defense, the closing statement. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for
Thank you.
your patience.
I know, so sad. R.I.P. Brenda Powell. Part 1 has the body cam and all the pictures again, if you want to see them.
Incredibly difficult trial.
So this is the defense now.
And, Mr. McAleese was saying correctly that
Could
the
be all right.
law does not require the state prove motive to show guilt beyond a reasonable doubt with respect to murder. But that's not why we're here. We're here for that sole core question, and that is why? Why did this happen? So the law doesn't require motive to show murder. But you heard from the experts that lack of motive is evidence of insanity. The law doesn't require that you love someone in order to get married, right? But would you do it? Would you marry someone you didn't love? That's our reason and that's our common sense. That's what we have to look at. So we bring that into the courtroom when we're considering why, what happened here. So we're going to start with the law. And the judge is going to give you written jury instructions, so you don't have to write any of this down. And again, if I say something that's different than what the judge says, she's the boss. Follow her instructions. But I believe what she's going to tell you is 𝐁𝐿. And the law is to establish the defense of insanity. The defendant must prove by the greater weight of the evidence that at the time of the offense, she did not know, as a result of a severe mental disease, the wrongfulness of her act. And you're going to get an instruction about what kind of insanity qualifies in Ohio for not guilty by reason of insanity. And you'll hear this instruction. Insanity may be of short or long duration. The test for insanity remains the same, irrespective of its duration. Whether a form of temporary insanity exists in this case is a question of fact for you to decide, for you as ladies and gentlemen of the jury. So we've worked on a decision tree, a chart that I think mirrors the instruction, that I think and I hope will give you some guidance into how you do your job. And what the instruction tells us is to start with this first question. Did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt all of the elements of the offenses charged? If no, we're done, not guilty. If you find that the state did prove beyond a reasonable doubt all of the elements of all the offenses, then the next question is, did the defense prove by a preponderance of the evidence the defense of insanity? And remember, the judge is going to give you the instruction and the definition of preponderance.
Against all logic.
Preponderance is much lower than beyond a reasonable doubt. Preponderance is tipping the scales ever so slightly in favor of the defense. 51% versus 49%. More likely than not. So we have the burden of proving to you that it is more likely than not that on the date of the offense, Ms. Powell suffered from a serious mental disease, schizophrenia. And as a result of that, she did not know the wrongfulness of her conduct. If you find that we have met that burden and proved that, then your verdict must be not guilty by reason of insanity. If we did not prove it, guilty. So let's look at what we have. We have 3 experts that the defense brought to you. Dr. Swales, Dr. Reardon.
Not insanity, in my opinion, says.
Who together have a combined level of experience of 100 years. Nearly 100 years. Combined, the 3 of them spent nearly 50 hours with Sidney Powell, not just talking to her, but also performing the valid objective, verifiable psychological tests that help come to the decision in this case. They did that and offered their opinion to you. We heard from Dr. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 today. And Dr. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 said, well, you really can't use any testing to determine whether or not someone was insane at the time of the offense. You really can't use any testing that someone was malingering at the time of the offense. But she tried to tell you that her test, her interview of Sydney tells her that she was malingering back on March 3rd, 2020. Remember she said that from the witness stand? Oh, I think she was malingering back on March 3rd, 2020. But she can't tell you whether or not she was suffering from a severe mental disease at that time, because those tests don't really count. They really don't tell us anything.
Oh.
That's what you've got to consider.
Okay.
So you heard from the doctors, you heard from witnesses, and they use this word prodromal. Prodromal is early signs and symptoms of a mental health disorder. Early signs and symptoms of a mental health disorder. Well, what have we heard during the testimony? What have we seen during this trial?
Just that alone.
We heard that there were these telltale signs of schizophrenia, and they started long before we ever got to this courtroom. We heard from some corroborating witnesses. Amanda Brown. Amanda Brown told you she was friends with Sydney from before school even started, at summer gym, before 9th grade at St. B. And she described where Sydney started in 9th grade and kind of where she ended in 12th grade. It said she started out as this kind of bubbly person with a bubbly personality and ended much more withdrawn. You heard from Amanda that there were signs and symptoms of mental health. These are the prodromal, I can't say it, prodromal signs that started before the deep psychotic break on March 3rd. She talks about her junior year being so despondent that Sydney wasn't really going out with anyone, with her friend group. She wasn't talking to anyone outside that friend group. She wouldn't go to restaurants, malls, or the movie theater. And Lauren
so like isolation, and she needed to kill her mother?
Evidence. Why? Why do you think Sydney wasn't doing that? It's because of those voices. Those voices were telling her, you're a failure.
I agree, Kay.
You're a loser. You're nothing. That's why she didn't want to go out.
That was one of them. It
You
was
heard that she had this panic attack.
borderline personality.
And how was that corroborated? Not only did Amanda Brown experience it, Lauren Curry knew of it as well. We brought in a teacher who saw it and experienced it as well. Mrs. Milligan, talk to you about that. And Amanda Brown also, I would submit to you, talked to you about those visual hallucinations that Sydney was experiencing. She called them visual hallucinations? No, she didn't. But she described to her, to Amanda, these dreams, these really vivid, bizarre dreams. And she told Amanda, I don't know if they're in the daytime, I don't know if they're at nighttime, but Amanda told you that when Sydney would describe them to her, she was shaking her legs. That's the corroboration of these visuals. Hallucinations, both audio and visual.
Audio and visual hallucinations.
We heard Lauren Curry say Sydney had this anxiety in high school and it got worse in college. We heard Amanda Brown say,
The pressure.
you know, in the beginning of college, Sydney seemed like she was okay. She was happy to be there.
So the pressure made her snap.
By that third semester, she was withdrawn.
Do you believe that? We all experience
Voices
pressure.
were getting louder in Sydney's head. And the voices were turning to paranoia.
And mental health issues.
That's what caused
I know it's uncomfortable to talk about.
to fall. That's corroboration. That's the evidence.
Let's talk about it.
And you heard from witness after witness after witness about theories of how that could have happened, right? Well, some kids are involved in athletics and it's hard for them to manage their time. Well, some kids have a real hard time with the freedom of being on their own in college. Some kids just don't know how to manage time.
Yay. Hi,
None of that
Debbie.
is present.
Hi,
in
my
Sydney.
girl. Good to see you.
None of it. In fact, you heard Lauren Curry say, look, she didn't really skip school. I skipped once, and I don't think she skipped class more than me. And she tried. She was trying hard. She talked to you about this class that they had together. And I think it was the creative writing class. And she said we would sit down and we would study together. And Sydney was really trying. And I thought she did really well in that class. And I said to her, Ms. Curry, would you be surprised if I told you Sydney got an F in that class? And I think you saw her reaction from the witness stand. She was surprised today. Because it wasn't a lack of effort that was torpedoing Sydney's grades. Lauren Curry told you she wasn't out partying all the time. She had the one episode in 2018 about alcohol, but other than that, there's no evidence that that's what she was doing. Lauren Curry said it's not like she was staying out late, getting drunk, and too hungover to go to class. She told you that.
Who has
This
it
is
does
the
not?
downward spiral. This is the corroboration that shows
Let me tell you.
things are not going well for Sydney. This is more than just a kid
Oh,
who's
boy.
struggling with the first year of college. Sydney goes from National Honor Society, 3.8 grade point average at St. Vincent, a student athlete, a leader in the community. And she graduates in May of 2018. And by her third semester at Mount Union, she's been expelled, suspended because of academic reasons. She goes from a 3.8 to a 2.21 to a 1.0 to suspended. That's not a downward spiral.
I did
That's
that
corroboration
though,
of her
one time.
mental health issues. That's what's causing this.
I did. Oh no.
You heard she's not really leaving
no.
the dorm room.
Do we need to talk?
Ms. Curry said, we had
Oh,
all
nice.
these events in the sorority and she only went to one that last semester. Ms. Curry told you, if she wasn't with me, she was really in the dorm, in her bed, on her phone. Why? It's because of those voices. Those voices are telling Sydney, you're a loser, you're a failure. Everybody else has their act together except for you. That's why she's not going outside. She believes that everyone is talking about her. She believes that everyone knows that she's a failure. And that's what's keeping her in her room.
Or that she's lying?
At some point, this lie gets too heavy, right? At some point, this idea that I'm just going to buy some more time. At some point, it's so difficult to live with that lie.
Lily.
You would think that a sane, rational person would set it down.
Lily said maybe the voices were on Insta and Facebook. We covered the Tiffany Lucas case where she claims she shot her children due to hearing stuff on social media. Make sure you watch that case too. But before I continue, make sure you watch Ashley case too. Very good. That's my favorite case. That was my first case I covered here. Make sure you go back and replay it. I still owe you guys a playlist.
So let's
on
look
that.
at when that happened, right? Sydney is home.
We have another big
for
case
Christmas
coming up
break.
this
This
weekend.
is 2019.
All of it.
December 21st of 2019, you heard Ms. Gaffney testify. Sydney signed a letter, certified mail, to her house that said you're on suspended. Academically, you are suspended from this university. So, I mean, what's the plan, right? What's Sydney's plan? That she's going to buy some time? Buy some time for what? That somehow she's going to just go back to school and they're going to say, oh, no, we changed our mind. That somehow she's going to go back to school and her dad's going to say, you know what? This is really cool. I guess you're going to school for free this semester. I don't have to pay any money. Nobody asked me for that money. That's her plan.
I think so, Debbie, but it looks
That's
like
not
it.
a plan. That's a delusion. And 𝐁𝐮𝐲 doesn't want to go back to school. You'll see text messages that we produce that you'll have back there. Text messages between Brenda and 𝐁𝐮𝐲 on January 12th, the day before school starts on the 13th. And you heard there's some excitement among 𝐁𝐮𝐲's friends to kind of go back to school. And that makes sense. They've been home with mom and dad. They opened up their Christmas presents. Now you're going back to school. But 𝐁𝐮𝐲 is up in her room. She's isolating, and she won't come out. And the only way Brenda can communicate with her is by texting her. 𝐁𝐮𝐲, what's going on? You got to go. When are you going to go? What are you doing? Why are you staying up in your room until the moment before you got to leave? And now we know why 𝐁𝐮𝐲 was up there, because those voices were telling her, you're a failure. Everybody's got their life figured out except for you. And that's when the lie turned into something else. That's when it turned into pathology. Because it doesn't make any sense that she's going to get in the car and drive to Mount Union and just pretend to be a student and no one's going to figure that out. But she's convinced herself,
yes,
this is what I can do. I can do this. And she gets in the car and she drives to Mount Union. And she's acting like everything is cool. And right from the beginning, it's not. Lauren said, well, 𝐁𝐮𝐲's name wasn't on the door. The key card's not working. She doesn't seem to be enrolled in classes. I didn't see her with any real books. But the delusion is so strong. And 𝐁𝐮𝐲 can't face reality. So this false reality is created. To the point where when Miss Gaffney sees her and talks to her and says, 𝐁𝐮𝐲, what are you doing? You're not enrolled here. Yes, I am. They kind of stopped Miss Gaffney in her tracks, and she had to look. Well, did I miss something? I mean, did she sign for that piece of paper? Was there an appeal that I'm aware of, not aware of?
She was showing up to class for like weeks.
You're not enrolled here. No, I fixed it with emails. That's the delusion. Because what's the plan, right? What's the sane, rational plan? That 𝐁𝐮𝐲's just going to talk her way out of being unenrolled with the assistant dean of student affairs in the Mount Union administration building? That's the plan? Does that make sense?
Against all logic says, the kid did not know how to deal with shit that didn't go to way. That's what happens when parents pamper their kids too much. You know that every kid gets participation trophy. Okay, so nurture versus nature. Did she experience trauma, something that led her to this, or was it just her environment at the time of, right? But we all experience all that kinds of stuff. So we don't go off doing anything like this. I had mental health issues, so I can empathize with that aspect of it.
She gets a week.
In a sense where it does.
Because the dean says, okay, parents on vacation. We'll activate your card.
The month.
You got to be out in a week, though. So now this kind of delusional plan seems to be working. See, Lauren, I told you, my card works now. See, it was just a mistake. I fixed it. And life is okay. Life is fine. Everything's going to be okay. It's what 𝐁𝐮𝐲's trying to tell herself. When at the same time, those voices are saying, it's not okay. It's not okay. People know you're a failure. And this is what is causing that delusion. It takes a second and finally a third meeting with the University of Mount Union administrators, Dean Gaffney and Dean Frazier. And finally, Dean Frazier had to say, look, if you don't go today, I'm going to call your parents. So this delusion has come crashing down. And she says, okay. And a new reality comes into play. Well, you know, Lauren, this is just my mom's decision and my decision. We decided together I should take some time off. I'm going to work. It's going to be great. We're going to live together in that townhouse next year. I'll be back. And she leaves.
By the way, this is her lawyer who has been with her from like day one. He has stuck with her. He even took his case knowing that he wasn't going to get paid. He's a good friend of the family.
And what happened over that next week is not okay.
Their relationship was questioned.
What happened over that next week
didn't mean anything. It's just the media.
The 3rd is not
normal. If
But
that was any
he
one of our
truly
daughters,
said he loves Sydney
we would be terrified.
and the family.
Rightfully so. What's going on with Sydney during that week? We know she's staying in a hotel at least 2 of those times. And you know, it's hard to piece things together. And I asked the lead detective, right? Detective Dave Whitten, who's got 30 years of experience, who's done 200 homicides, who's reviewed everything, all of the evidence, and supervised this case for some guidance. And I said, Detective Whitten, does it seem like Sydney would be living in her car? Is there any other evidence of any other explanation? No, that seems right. So it wasn't me coming up with this theory. This was Detective Whitten, the lead detective, telling you that's the best that we can construct.
I feel like mental health is like difficult to talk about, right? When do we recognize it as accepting? It's a cultural thing, it's a moral thing, and then it's a family thing. And then against, I have 2 freshmen in college right now. Do you have to worry? No. But I think he is like recognizing when there's mental health issues and being accepting of it, right? So for like me growing up, my parents were Hispanic, so they didn't really like full blown believe in it until I actually there was like issues, and then I finally got involved in the mental health field. So it was like, I'm sure it's probably like a mind, you know, twisting to them, but I feel like just learning to recognize and being open to it. I think.
And was everything fine during that week?
Really?
She's
Searching on the internet how to
I
make
do. Knowing that
money.
you can come talk to your parents about things like that is important. Not a parent, but
you know, Dr. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 said, oh, that everything was fine. I mean, I looked at her internet activity, and she's on TikTok, and she's looking up knock-knock jokes. That's how we assess a teenager's mental health, is looking at what they post on social media, looking at their text messages. Are you kidding me? Social media is poison. Poison.
Ooh, that's also true.
And everything a teenager does that they want to project on social media is, look at me, my life is great. Everything's so cool. That's not reality.
I do agree.
That's not.
She has to pay for what she has done.
To try to assess someone's sanity at the time of the offense.
Mental health gives a stigma, absolutely. And it makes people uncomfortable.
But even if you look at all those cell phone records, what human contact did Sydney have with someone in her support system?
What do we have to lose?
I'm not
Let's
saying
just talk
text
about mental
messages,
health
everything's
issues.
great. I'm not saying
Copy
I'll send you
into
a
the world.
TikTok video, let me tell you a knock-knock joke. I'm talking about human contact where someone
Let's
put
be
their
one.
eyes on her
Be
and
accepting
said,
and fine.
I think she's okay, or this is not good. None. Connor, the friend, says, are you gonna go out? No, I'm not going out. Sydney was home. You'll look at those text messages and those cell phone records. Sydney went home early on in that week. And Brenda says, Sydney, 360, Life 360 says you're at home. What are you doing? And the delusion continues. Well, my professor is out on vacation, and I thought I'd come home for a little bit. And Brenda's like, no, you
Hi, Jules, baby.
only one
Hello.
class on Tuesday. What are you doing? And can you imagine the voices in Sydney's head at that moment? Where she must feel that she can't even stay at home.
Where living in your car in a hotel alone is better. That's where she's at. She's malingering sanity. That's what she's doing that week. She wants the world to think everything is fine, everything is okay. And that's not reality. It's not okay. But there's this one bright spot, right? 2 hours. Monday, March 2nd, 2 hours of watching The Bachelorette, where Sydney can go back to Mount Union. She can be with her friends. And for a couple of hours, they can do the girl things that they do. Laugh at The Bachelor. Order some ice cream.
So she wasn't having a psychotic episode?
Fine. I mean, she was bubbly. She was laughing. Everything was okay. But everything wasn't okay. Because when Sydney waved goodbye and got
Thank
in
you,
her
Jules,
car,
for being here. Appreciate you, love.
she was homeless. She was broke.
Thank you for
And she
welcoming
was
Jules.
alone.
She's new here.
And she just
She's
left
a good Good new
president
friend.
of the sorority that she wanted to be in. She just left all the cheerleaders who, by all intents and purposes in Sydney's mind, have it all figured out. And she's descending into this hell. And when she hits the send button on the text message back to Lauren saying, I'm home, and there's 7 E's on the end of it, she wants to project sanity. That's what she's hiding.
Sanity.
What do we know about the next day? What we know is this timeline. And before we get to the timeline, I'm sorry. Lauren does say to you, everything was okay. And when Sydney left at 11 o'clock or so on March 2nd, she seemed okay. And Steve Powell said, she seemed okay. She seemed fine. So think about that. What's going on there? What's the alternative? Can Lauren or Steve say to themselves, I missed it? Maybe I missed something? Because that is a hard burden to carry. And I certainly understand why they said what they said. But we're looking at the facts. And
I would love
evidence
to
and
hear
what
from an
happened.
outside family member,
And what we know is Sydney goes home and Steve sees her on Life
which is
360.
quite possible.
He's at the house between 11 and 11:30. About 11:15 or so, he calls Brenda from Sydney's phone. He says, can you come here? I don't know what's going on. Something's going on with school. He knows that she's not enrolled because he's been trying to log in through the email and they say she's not enrolled. And Steve says, Brenda's better at this than me. And he leaves. We know from the cell phone records, and Detective Whitten verified this, that Brenda tells Steve,
I agree,
at
Pantera. It is a real thing.
11:49, I'm pulling in the driveway now. So 11:49 to that first call, 12:36. Is that 47 minutes? So Brenda and Sydney are alone in the house for 47 minutes, and Brenda's doing what Brenda does. She's trying to figure it out in a loving and supportive way. What's going on? Your dad's saying this. What do you mean? I don't understand, I'm enrolled. For 47 minutes. You think Brenda's yelling and screaming at Sydney for 47
Hello,
minutes?
prison guard. Good to see you.
Absolutely not.
Good to see you, love. Shout out to you.
And they're trying to work it out.
Shout out to
And
my
Brenda calls
prison guard
Mount
here.
Union and speaks to Teresa. And Teresa tells her, or she tells Teresa, I'm sorry, how could Sydney be unenrolled as a student at Mount Union University? And
keeping
Teresa
calm.
writes down in the note memo, Sydney was there sitting by her. And Detective Whitten interviewed Teresa, and Dean Frazier talked to Teresa. And Brenda's not mad when that call comes in. She's not telling Teresa, my daughter's upset, she's freaking out, she's inconsolable. She's just trying to figure stuff out. And then we know when Mount Union.
I feel like when her mom gets the call and her dad literally left work because she was home on a day from school she wasn't supposed to be. That's a little alarming to me. I'm not trying to be judgmental. I know there's like helicopter parents, etc., whatever, but I feel like if they were so worried about her reaction, it makes me think that they were aware that there was a behavior issue or a mental health issue. Because like if I came home, my parents probably wouldn't care unless they got a call from school that I was like ditching or doing something, getting caught up. It's not about me, but I'm just saying my experience. I feel like the fact that the dad felt like he had to leave work to go home. I'm sorry. And then the mom left work and she worked at a hospital. It was concerning to them, right? And so I feel like there might have been red flags before that maybe were missed or they were not aware
calls
of.
Back at 12:36 and 45 seconds. It's a short phone call, 15 or 20 seconds. But we also know that there's no evidence at all of any argument or fight before that. I asked Detective Whitten that. He agreed. No evidence of any argument or fight. They took pictures of the whole house. There's no furniture in disarray or anything like that. And neither Dean Frazier or Dean Gaffney reported any concern in Brenda's voice. No yelling, no screaming, no agitation. She was calm and she was rational. And 15 to 20 seconds into that call, Sydney
A buildup.
snapped. And
Snap.
there was a psychotic break.
It's a real
And
thing.
she did commit the acts that led to Brenda's death. And they are awful and they are horrific.
I'm not minimizing
They
it.
scream out insanity. They scream out insanity for that 3.5 minutes. And when Mount Union calls back, because they're concerned, they've heard these horrible thuds and the punching and the screaming, and they're concerned with good reason. And what I remember Dean Gaffney saying is, I said on the phone, Brenda, are you okay? If you don't pick up, we're going to call the police. Detective Whitten, when I asked him that question, he remembers Dean Gaffney saying, do you need us to call the police? The police were mentioned right there at 12:40 and 15 seconds. And Dr. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 and the prosecution wants you to think, well, there wasn't a whole lot of time to do a lot of stuff. I mean, look at this timeline. It's 27 minutes from the first Mount Union call at 12:36 to 1:02 when Officer Jackson activates his body cam and he enters the house. 27 minutes. What was going on in those 27 minutes? We have 14 minutes lapse from this is Brenda, which was at 12:40, to Steve and Sydney talking. That's 14 minutes. When Steve said the police are on their way, another 8 minutes goes by.
That's when
That
she
is
freaked
a
out.
long time.
She and the popo were pulling up.
What we heard from Dr. Reardon is this idea of disassociation. And we heard it from Dr. Swales. And we heard it from Dr. Tinney. And Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗸𝗲 has even made this diagnosis of borderline personality disorder that contains an element of identity dissociation. Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗲𝗲 said that. Well, what is dissociation? It's when you're someone else.
You're someone else.
And it's extreme. And it's also real. That's what the medicine tells us. That's what the science tells us. And do you think for a second that Sydney, after this 3.5 minutes, in her sane mind, is able to calmly say, this is Brenda, on the phone?
I agree, Kat.
What happened?
When
What
do
happened
people
during that
snap?
next 14 minutes?
Again, is it nature versus
I'm gonna
nurture?
suggest to you that
When we talk about
what
true
know
crime.
is these
Are people
psychotic
born
breaks,
evil?
they wax and they wane. That's what you heard. You heard that from Dr. Swales, Dr. Tinney, and Dr. Reardon. And you know what? Dr. Swales knows, because he served 19 years in the Metro Health Cleveland Psychiatric Board. 19 years where he treated schizophrenic patients. And he saw them. He saw them with his own eyes engage in psychotic behavior, violent psychotic breaks. And I said, Dr. Swales, tell the jury what that looks like. What are you seeing when someone who has schizophrenia is in a violent psychotic break? And he said, they have no idea what's going on. And they have no idea what they're doing. And we have to restrain them and tie them down sometimes so they don't hurt themselves or others. And when they come out of it, They have very little memory of what's going on. And there are moments and flashes where they can communicate. You know who else we heard that from? We heard that from Amanda Brown. Amanda now.
I really can truly empathize though. Like it's hard to talk about mental health issues and it's hard to deal with them. And I think when we see them in cases like this, it's almost like very uncomfortable, right? But I feel like there were red flags that were missed. I do think she has mental health issues. And I do believe she loved her mother. I do.
Pediatric division at Akron Children's Hospital. And before that, remember, she was a sitter at the psych ward. And she said that would happen. She'd be talking to a kiddo, and all of a sudden, like a light switch, it would flip, and that kid would do something completely out of character. And oftentimes they wouldn't remember it.
I get it. People can be nasty about mental health too.
So we know.
I'm talking to you about
After
nasty.
3.5 minutes, this phone call comes in. There's talk of police. Sydney says, "This is Brenda," and she hangs up. And for the next 14 minutes, doesn't it make sense that Sydney is in some kind of disassociative shock, catatonic state? And you saw the pictures of the house. It's not a big house. You can get anywhere in that house in 30 seconds. And imagine Sydney there in the house with her mother, and she's not leaving.
She's not crying here, but we saw her crying before.
And the phone rings. And do you
That's a good
remember what
point.
we experienced here in court when somebody's phone rang in the back? What did that do to us? The judge first. It snapped our attention.
We're all
right?
nuts, so
That's what we're conditioned to.
in one way or another,
And
right?
Sydney, here's the phone ring. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And it's coming out of this and having some
Hello,
flashes
NorCal.
of lucidity.
Hello, NorCal Jim. Good to see you.
Says-
Glad you made it.
Hello? And this phone call lasts 30 seconds.
That's what I meant about being accepting
Sydney, where's mom?
and kind.
She's on the phone with Mount Union. And that could have been her last memory. But what's going on? Why are the police coming? And Sydney is looking around the house and she sees the broken window and she sees the blood. The 30 seconds that she's on that phone, all of that could have happened. And she's telling Steve, "Oh my God, there's been a break-in. There's blood everywhere."
And what happens after the next 8 minutes when she knows that the police are coming? She waits there. And the prosecution wants you to believe that that's her plan? That she's staged a crime scene, a fake crime scene, that she's thrown this
I have to say, if you've been like a drinker before or been addicted and like you do messed up stuff when you're on a different type of level, right? And so I feel like it's kind of the same. If she was experiencing a mental health issue, it might have set her out of reality and she staged the scene. We make mistakes when we're drunk, etc. But I feel like for a month, I've never seen anything like that. Like for a whole school semester to pretend you're a student.
Something through the window.
Show up.
She's broken the window.
You have to be escorted out.
And this is the plan. All I have to do now is just wait.
Augie always
till
has
the
great
police
things
arrive,
to
and
say.
they'll never know it was me. She doesn't clean up.
They need to
Doesn't
take
change
care
her
and love.
clothes.
Oh,
She doesn't move the body. She
hard.
doesn't move the weapons.
it's hard for the evil people.
that have her
But you make a
fingerprints
great
and
point,
DNA
Augie.
all over them.
You're great.
She doesn't get in the car and leave. Brenda's car's in the driveway. Her car's in the garage. She doesn't do any of those things.
I know. We shouldn't get judged because we're
Because she's not
of
thinking
experienced
rationally.
things. I really like
She's
your
in a
comment, Augie.
catatonic-
Thank you for sharing.
Psychotic break. That's what happened.
Welcome back, Sarah. Yay!
And the prosecution
Yay!
and Ms. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, Dr. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, I'm sorry,
Have really done a really good job of identifying all of the stereotypes and the myths
Okay.
that prevent good mental health in our community. Oh, your kid is struggling with grades? Oh no, that's just a kid thing.
You don't want to go out? Oh, you know what? Kids like alone time. They do. They like to be alone. How do you check and know if your kid's okay? Well, if they don't tell you anything, they must be fine.
Communication.
Well, you know what we can do? Here, parents, check your kid's social media account because that'll give you a really good idea of their mental health.
I do agree with that.
Shawnee,
if my parents knew what I was doing with my phone at like 17 years old, I would have been banned. I'd have been locked up now.
It doesn't say that she's hallucinating, then it must not be happening.
Don't act
No,
like
it's
you
not
don't know what I'm
happening.
talking
Your
about.
kid's lying.
Y'all
You know
playing.
what? This
Y'all
isn't
playing.
a mental health issue. This is a character flaw. And Sydney's a liar.
Don't give me that.
And she's
Don't give me that.
deceptive. And she's manipulative. That's who she is.
Not buying it.
If someone talked to my daughter like that,
I'm like, I'm glad now you don't
is
see
that
what I
what
was
we want
doing.
to say to our community about how we think about mental health? That unless your kid is Googling what happens when I'm hallucinating, that it doesn't exist? This is appalling.
Oh,
It's disgusting.
whoa. Appalling?
And you put a
Disgusting?
picture of Brenda from the internet and you want to speak for her? What's the motive? The motive is apparently all we heard was Sydney was so upset that she got suspended from school that she killed her mother. Does that make sense to you? Is that your reason and your common sense that that is absolutely true? Because if that's it, then Sydney's fooled everybody. She's fooled all the doctors.
Calling Ocala.
She fooled those doctors who were there that day.
Or she didn't. Maybe they didn't
her.
see a mental health issue like that before.
She fooled the doctors during 9 days
Black
of
and white, sir.
inpatient, involuntary hospitalization who diagnosed her with schizophrenia. She fooled all three of our experts. But more importantly, she fooled Ken Dees, a police officer who knows that family for 40 plus years and told you there is no evidence
She's
at
on
all
medication.
of any
They said it.
dysfunction. There's no violence. That's not who they are. She fooled the teacher, Catherine Mulligan, who taught her how to ski, who took her on a religious retreat because she embodied the values of the Catholic school that she taught at. She fooled Betsy. Betsy bonded her out, and she fooled her. She's really a cold-blooded killer, and Betsy missed it. She fooled her own father, and she fooled Brenda. That's what they want you to believe? They say, trust the science, but they ignore it when there are scientific methods to determine, is this person suffering from a serious mental disease? There are proven, valid, objective, legitimate tests, and they ignore them. She's lying. We checked her media account. There are proven, valid, legitimate psychological tools to determine if someone is malingering. And Dr. 𝗷𝗸𝗲 didn't do that. Why? She says, well, we can't go back and test in time, but she said, she was malingering back on March 3rd, 2020. So she tells you she can't do something, and then she tells you what she's done. It doesn't make any sense. Why did Dr. 𝗷𝗸𝗲 not test? Because she got the answer she wanted. She got the answer that Joe DeAngelo wanted from her. You'll read the email. You heard her say what Prosecutor DeAngelo said. That's what happened here. So let's look at what we have provided and proven.
No. The facts of why she is.
All of these individuals who saw Sydney initially are there. They're not expert witnesses, as Dr. Timmy said. They're not paid by the defense. They're there because they happen to be working that shift on that day. And what we know is on March 3rd, within hours of Brenda's homicide, Sydney is at Akron City Hospital. And there she's seen by 𝗏𝗏. And what do we know about 𝗏𝗏? Well, Dr. 𝐁𝐮𝐲 knows him. Dr. 𝐁𝐿𝐲 said, I practiced with him for 30 years, and he's a good man.
We
He's
heard
a
from
good
Dr. 𝐁𝐿𝐲.
physician, and I would trust him implicitly. And he diagnosed Sydney within hours of acute psychosis. And he prescribed medication that is taken for schizophrenia. And he recommended she should be confined in a mental health pod and considered for involvement with the psychodiagnostic clinic and or confinement at North Coast Behavioral Health Services for forensic commitment. Within hours of Sydney being charged with murder, this doctor is saying, something ain't right. This is acute psychosis. Let me give her some medication. And you know what? I'm not here to evaluate and diagnose sanity at the time of the offense, but I know who is. Psychodiagnostic clinic. I know who is North Coast Behavioral Health. That's where she needs to go.
I feel like we're going to see that. Her conviction has been overturned as of December 26th. Her appeal was granted, I guess, for prosecutorial misbehavior or something like that. They didn't get a chance to rebuttal one of the medical professionals. So we're going to either see another trial or we're going to see her go into a mental health facility.
Sydney then goes to the jail.
My opinion.
She's there from March 4th through the 6th. And Dr. Timmy talked to you about being there, boots on the ground, when someone comes in and they are acutely psychotic. She's given
and we are seeing that Slenderman case right now, right?
The gown that you can't rip and try to hang yourself. She's placed on suicide prevention. She's in the most secure mental health pod on the entire jail, where she has the highest level of services, and people are checking in on her. And then this thing happens, and Dr. Timmy explained it really well, where these two constitutional rights come into conflict with each other. She has a right to a bond and right to get out. But we at the jail also have to figure out.
Got to prove it. Her conviction is overturned.
And if she wasn't suffering from a serious mental disease, they wouldn't have sent her for involuntary commitment. The jail knows. They've seen her. They send her over to PES, Portage Path Emergency Services. And she's there for probably less than 24 hours. And again, this is triage. This isn't diagnose, treat, evaluate, counsel. This is, what are we going to do with this person? Are we going to send her home? Is she stable enough to go home? And no. This patient would benefit from inpatient psychiatric hospitalization for her safety, further evaluation, and treatment. That happens. We then know that Sydney goes to Akron General Medical Center, Cleveland Clinic, and she's there for 9 days. And this is when things can slow down a little bit. The doctors, the clinicians, the treating physician, the counselors, the psychologists can take a look at what's going on with Sydney. And these are the folks who don't have any interest other than trying to help. She's there for 9 days, and she's diagnosed with schizophrenia, paranoid type, by Dr. 𝗏𝗏. And who is he? You heard from Dr. Swales. He was one of his students. And he's a good doctor. He knows what he's doing. He diagnosed Sydney with schizophrenia and describes 𝗵𝗶𝗶 and 𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗲, antipsychotic medication for a serious mental disease. And they say trust the science. That's what the science tells you. That's what the medicine tells you. That's what the testing tells you. And Dr. 𝗏𝗏 asked for a psychological testing by Dr. Stevenson and Dr. Alan Gilbertson. And they confirmed the diagnosis of schizophrenia.
Why put him in a mental health facility? I agree, Stormy. I agree. It's maybe make sure that they're well enough to then move on and to go into like a prison or general population, etc., and do their time. But I do feel like I wish the justice system aligned more with mental health treatment,
They
etc.
prescribe additional medication, Ativan
I think it's so important.
for anxiety, antidepressant,
It
trazodone,
makes me so
and
sad.
Haldol. These are not defense experts.
Being
These are
someone who has
people who are telling
experienced
you
it too,
through
I
their
have
record, Sydney has a
the
serious mental disease,
background.
schizophrenia. Please listen to them. That's the science. That's the medicine. And it works. We know
Something
that
else,
Sydney
too.
then goes to see
I know.
Dr. 𝐁𝐮𝐲. And she's there from March 31st all the way up until now, today. She's a current patient. You saw Dr. 𝐁𝐻 on Friday. And he diagnosed Sydney in March of 2020
𝗟𝗏𝗃.
with this schizoaffective disorder, which are
She
all
was on all
serious
those
mental
meds.
diseases. She's been treating with Dr. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, Dr. 𝗚𝗏𝗃𝗓𝗏. And Dr. 𝐁𝐻 gives her medication, and he's been doing it for 3.5 years. There are breakthrough symptoms. What happens when a breakthrough symptom occurs? Sydney tells her therapist, the therapist calls the psychiatrist, and Dr. 𝐁𝐻 adjusts the medication. That's how science works. That's how medicine works. You can't fake a breakthrough symptom, get medication, and respond well to it. Sydney has a favorable response to proven
𝗟𝗏𝗃.
evidence-based treatments for schizophrenia.
What sucks, our
She
insurances
was
don't
placed in an
support at
inpatient,
all.
involuntary
hardly pay for
psychiatric
that. I
hospital
know,
where
it's
she
a whole
was
nother issue.
diagnosed and treated for schizophrenia, and she got a little bit
Don't get me
better.
started now.
She was subject to outpatient treatment for 3.5 years and counseling, legitimate, proven medical interventions that worked. That's the science. And Sydney somehow fooled all these people, right? She's Meryl Streep. She's been able to fool and act for
Not
3.5
Meryl
years
Streep.
and pull the wool over Dr. 𝐁𝐻's eyes. She pulled the wool over Todd Ivan, and she pulled the wool over Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗏.
Okay.
But she's not only Meryl Streep, but she's also Sigmund Freud, because she knows how to act, but she knows the psychological symptoms to act to get the right diagnosis.
I actually kind of really like what he just said right now. But again, remember, 30 times stabbed with a kitchen knife in the back, in the neck, and throat. That's overkill. We know that for those of us who cover true crime all
And
the time.
she's Meryl Streep and Sigmund Freud.
Us
She's
true
also,
crime
also
junkies.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? Because she has to
That
know
was
something about the
overkill.
law. So you think that's what's going on with Sydney? That's her plan over the last 3.5 years?
Overkill, baby.
She's fooled all these
Intentions
people.
change
and
if
she's
it's
fooled
that much
Dr.
overkill.
𝐁𝐿's,
Or no? What do you think?
Dr. Reardon, and Dr. Timmy.
Meryl Streep is a good.
Who says to trust the science and trust the medicine and trust the psychological testing? Lieutenant Whidden did. I asked him. Detective Whidden, the jury wants to know, because Detective Whidden again was talking about, I looked through her phone and I didn't see any evidence of serious mental disease. And I said, well, if the jury wants to know if Sydney was suffering from a severe mental illness on the date of the
Could have been the
offense,
wrong
a better
meds, too.
witness, no disrespect other than you, would be someone who's qualified to make that diagnosis. Yes.
She could have been on the wrong meds. We saw that. I think it was in like episode or part 3 where one of she got released from the mental hospital after the crime, and then she was put in the care of to her grandmother, where they did like she was under mental health professional care, and she actually got put on medication where they saw like improvement, and then they didn't. So yes, medications can change your train of thought. Absolutely.
Someone who does some
Especially
testing, like
antipsychotics,
personality
those are
testing,
like-
cognitive testing, tests to
It's
determine there's
difficult.
actually a
It's
severe
difficult.
mental
It
illness or
changes
not.
your
Yes.
brain.
And you would want a
Changes your brain,
psychologist
the
or a
dynamic.
psychiatrist to actually do the testing
Scientifically.
that determines if there is a serious mental illness or not. Yes. Who did that? Dr. Timmy, Dr. Reardon, Dr. 𝐁𝐿's. Who didn't do that? The person who's testifying for the first time in her life on a sanity evaluation in a murder case in a trial today. Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗃. That's who didn't do it. So we heard from Dr. Reardon. And this is where I have to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence insanity. So we brought forth Dr. Reardon, 46 years of experience, spent 7 hours with Sydney, did all the.
Thank you, Stormy, for sharing that. I understand. I understand. We don't judge anyone here. We all have issues. Oh boy. I'm getting me started now. Wait for the verticals, because apparently people seem to like those.
Depressive disorder, psychotic features.
Them trolls be on me, hot and
He
heavy.
considered malingering. He has to. He considered it,
Wow.
he tested for it, and he ruled it out. And said there's a clear pattern of
being
an
an ass.
individual with a genuine disorder. Sydney made no effort to overstate the symptoms. These are the valid psychological testing.
It could
This
take
is the
years
science
to find the right
help
medication.
You, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, decide a very difficult question. Is she malingering? Does she have a serious mental disease or not?
I actually had a car accident once where it was the other person's fault, and we ended up going through this whole lawsuit. But while I was getting treatment, they were trying to put me on like anxiety meds, and there was one where like I totally lost my shit. So I do agree. I've been through it. And I also worked for Big Pharma. Not a criminal working for Big Pharma. Yeah, I did. I did. I worked for Big Pharma. I still do. Going on like 12 years. I do work in the healthcare field. Oh my God, I know. So hard to believe. But again, so I have been on the other side of it, right? I can understand like the legal side of it. I can understand all of their perspectives, but I also have that background experience on having experienced these issues myself. So I think that's a whole different thing. It's a whole different ball game, right? When you know someone or you have been through it yourself, it really does change the dynamic of like mental health, crimes, even just judging people, bullying people, knowing people.
How did the state prove its case in chief? The first 3 days, remember that? They called.
I just wish it was more accepting.
From Dr. Schott.
Timeout. All of you get a spanking and a timeout
They
tonight.
called a scientist from BCI that talked to you about DNA.
Pause. No.
They
Thank you.
called
I
an
appreciate
expert
you for being
from
here.
BCI
And I mean, that would
talked
love.
to you about blood spectrum.
Love spanking.
And what did those expert witnesses do? They followed the science.
You get vertical, I get vertical,
And they
yeah.
talked to you
Oh.
about their methodology.
People don't like that.
Right? Special Agent Borner, who did the blood spatter, didn't just go in and look around and say, here's my conclusions. The BCI analyst who looked at the DNA didn't just look at it and say, looks like Brenda and a mixture of maybe Sydney's blood. No, they did the scientific testing that their profession says, if you want to get it right, do it this way. That's the scientific method. That's what the state said, pay attention to in the first days of the trial, but when we're proving it, none of that matters. The scientific method, these valid, independent, verified tests that will give you answers, ignore them. They're meaningless. Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗃 can tell you. She looked at her cell phone records. She looked at her TikTok account. And she can tell you,
Not the
3
TikTok.
years ago, that Sydney's malingering. She can tell you, just by talking to her, looking at the records, she doesn't have a serious mental disease. That's what Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗃 wants you to buy. That's what they want you to buy. But we prove by a preponderance, and more than a preponderance, that Sydney is insane.
People get offended by my verticals.
The next slide. Dr. Reardon said at the time of the offense charge, Sydney Powell, as a result of a severe mental disease, was unable to appreciate the wrongfulness of her acts charged. She was in a psychotic state, out of touch with reality, and unable to know the wrongfulness of her acts. He's putting his reputation on the line, 46 years. And he says to you, I have rarely, if ever, seen a situation where an individual was in such an utterly compromised psychological state as Sydney Powell at the time of these offenses. It's one of a handful of cases that he told you from that witness stand that live with him, where it is so obvious that someone is in a psychological break and doesn't know the wrongfulness of her conduct. 2,000 evaluations, 46 years, hours with Sydney, doing the testing, ruling out malingering, and coming to that conclusion. You heard from Dr. Swales.
I better stop. You better stop.
And again, he's been doing
Everyone's
and
welcome to
observing
attention. Nothing but
and
love.
studying and diagnosing and treating
That's the ideal place.
schizophrenic patients
You don't
who
judge.
suffer violent outbreaks for 19 years. Imagine that job, working at the psych ward at Metro Health in Cleveland for 19 years. I mean, what didn't he see, right? He spent 23 hours with Sydney and did 20 different psychological tests. He's trying to be as exhaustive as possible. He knows you have to consider malingering. You have to when you're doing a forensic evaluation. And the only way he would consider it or rule it out or make that diagnosis is to do the testing, follow the science. What's the approved methodology? Use the best tools available. That's the scientific method. He did that. And he considered malingering, tested for it, and ruled it out. No evidence of feigned impairment. Valid, interpretable profile. Sidney Powell is not malingering. And he's also a neuropsychologist. He talked to you about that. And in the beginning, we're trying to figure out what is going on with Sydney. What happened on March 3rd? And we're getting some pieces of information from Akron General Medical Center, Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗏. And he's saying there's something with her temporal lobe. You guys ought to look at that. And Steve Powell does, because he wants answers. He takes his daughter to university hospitals in June of 2020. And there, they take her off the medication. They put her in an MRI and they watch her for 6 days.
2020. So then the parents were aware of the mental health issues. When the dad said in the body cam footage on part 1, we watched it, and he says, no, she's never had any mental health issues before. Sir, I'm not coming for you, but what did you say? On the stand, you literally admitted that you were not aware that she was having mental health issues, but now the lawyer's saying, let's go back to 2020. It's not adding up. Again, the red flags were there. They were missed or ignored. I get it. We get it. We do it all the time. I do it all the time. It's easy to miss the red flags when you include narcissism, violence, mental health issues. There's so many things.
And they test her. And they
The
pull
list
out.
is endless.
This isn't
baby.
a cognitive problem. This
It doesn't add up at all, no.
This wasn't a secret.
Doesn't.
What's left?
Someone needs to come
Dr.
clean
Swales
here.
tells you what's left is psychosis.
One of y'all.
Is the mental
Not
health
you in the
issue.
chat, but
That's what's
like
left.
family members.
So he tests her.
Dad, mom, Vinny.
And he tells you, in summary, it's my opinion, within a reasonable degree of psychological certainty, that at the time of the offense, the defendant, Ms. Powell, did have a severe mental disease, reversible mental illness, namely schizoaffective disorder, depressive type, first episode, in an acute episode. It's also my opinion, within a reasonable degree of psychological certainty, that at the time of the instant offense, the defendant did not know the wrongfulness of the alleged conduct. That's what he told you. And there wasn't a single follow-up question. Not one. Because you can't impeach the truth. His credentials are unassailable. And his conclusions are scientifically sound.
𝗟𝗏𝗃𝗏.
We heard from Dr. Robin Timmy. And he's been involved really at every level of the criminal justice system.
All of you.
I'm
Biggest thinking.
just going to nerd out for a second, right? He's got kind of a cool job. He goes to the jail and he studies the jail and he says, here's how you can design a jail better to help people. That's what he does. He goes across the nation and he's been boots on the ground, at the jail, in the emergency room, when someone is in acute psychotic state. He's seen it with his own eyes. Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗃 has read about it, but she's never seen it with her own eyes. Our experts have. And he saw Sydney for 5 hours. He administered the tests. He diagnosed her with a serious mental disease, schizoaffective disorder, depressive type. Malinger, he considered it, he tested for it, and he ruled it out. And he said the standardized forensic psychological testing removes the personal opinion and forces us to use a psychologist's proven scientific method of evaluating. Read that again. Removes the personal opinion. Everything you heard here from Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗃 was her personal opinion. Do we want that? Is that the scientific method? No. Follow the science. There is a method, and that method is the testing. And the testing takes away the subjective opinion of a psychologist. How does it do that? It measures the response across thousands of respondents. Thousands. So this isn't somebody throwing a dart at a dartboard. It's following the scientific method to get the best possible answer. That is overwhelming proof. And that's what Dr. Timmy did. You heard his conclusion. Ms. Powell was raised in an intact family.
She's not
by parents who
crying.
consistently supported her.
She's not
Her
crying.
childhood does not
We
appear
saw her so upset in
to
the other
include
videos.
the adversity very often seen in a population of people charged with murder. Nor did Ms. Powell present with any of the hallmarks of risk for violence known in the peer-reviewed literature. She had no history of violence, no history of antisocial behavior, no history of problems with employment or relationships, no history of substance abuse or major depressive disorder, no history of personality disorders or traumatic experience, no violent attitudes
I agree,
or problems with adherence to treatment. By all accounts, Ms. Powell and her mother were very close and confided in one another. Ms. Powell was able to rely on her mother for support and encouragement. In fact, Ms. Powell was shocked that her mother was warm and supportive about her academic woes, even in the final moments before her death. Unfortunately,
Almost done.
Ms. Powell was in a full-blown psychosis by that point and was completely unaware of her actions. At the time of the alleged offense, due to the active symptoms of severe mental disease, Ms. Powell was unable to appreciate the wrongfulness of her conduct. That's where the evidence takes us when you follow the science and you use the best possible tools available at the highest level of the profession. Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗃.
She looks very uncomfortable, right?
And did no testing. And claims that she's malingering. Back in March.
She kind of
But
looks
also
out of it.
well, we can't really test for
Yeah.
serious mental disease back
It's
in
terrible.
time. Why not? Because she got the answer she wanted. And she stopped.
Sharing is caring, Corso. Are we gonna make a sandwich tonight? A Melly sandwich?
Steve Powell came to me.
So what do we do? Great, Kat. What do we do? We are going to be more accepting of mental health issues and bullying to try to expose that, and we're going to be kind.
Objection.
And we're just going to be more open-minded. Whoa, whoa! Everybody arguing in the courtroom.
And it's taken a lot of time to get this case to you. But now,
She looks numb to me. I agree, Debbie. She looks very out of it.
this is your decision now.
Detached.
There's nobody
Disassociated.
on the planet that's better prepared for this decision than you. You've paid attention. You've listened through everything carefully.
I know it hasn't been easy.
No, it hasn't, sir.
You know, we heard
It's not been easy.
uh,
We're trying to understand
about
this.
religion. We heard about values. I was raised Catholic, and I've struggled with that faith. I've seen a lot. But I've been praying. And that's brought me some comfort and some guidance. And I hope that this brings you some comfort and guidance too. And it's 4 simple words, and it's defined everything I do in this case. Please help us, Brenda.
I don't like how he said that. Please help us, Brenda. No. No. Brenda's her own person. She deserves her own recognition. Again, Powell family, my condolences go out to you, the Powell family watching this. Plunder for the body cam footage. My girl footage. I love her. Make sure you check her out. She's amazing. That was back to part 1. But I'm always going to give credit where it's due. And so we're getting close to it. Tomorrow is the end of the trial for Sidney Powell. And for those of you who have stuck around, wow. I love you. Thank you. We're going to be covering another case where we do kind of like this, like a little series. We're going to finish 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 again this weekend, and then we're going to start a new one this weekend as well. So I appreciate you guys all for being here. I feel like we're all stuck, right? We're like stuck between, we've kind of been there and we're familiar with it, the mental health issues, and then we don't want to accept that it could be reality, right? Things can set people, quote unquote, make people snap. And we cover true crime here all day. And so I think my opinion is, you know, we just need to be more accepting of it. And so whether you experience it, live it, you see someone doxing someone here on the internet, you see whatever it is you hear about mental health issues, I think take it to a level of understanding where we can like empathize and understand it. We've never been through it. Maybe you've never been through it, and that's okay. You can sit here and say, you know, I've never had an experience with that before. And many of us can say, you know what, that was like my whole childhood, and I don't judge that. I don't. I don't. And so I just want to be open-minded and kind to it. That's all. Just be accepting of it. So with that being said, we're one part away from ending the Sidney Powell series. And again, I just want to send my love and sympathies and condolences to the Powell family. They know why and they know who they are. And thank you for watching my content. And I hope that I presented this case well with a lot of dignity, because I feel like I'm trying not to make my true crime channel about like me or the drama, but I feel like there's so much to that, right? Like it plays a factor into who you are and who you become and who you want to portray yourself on the internet as. And so I feel like I struggle with that. And so covering this case has been, you know, it's been a lot of learning and growth, right? To talk about like the issues that we don't want to talk about. And again, we don't know what Sidney was going through. We don't know her childhood. We don't know any of that. And we also don't know Brenda's childhood. And we don't know what she was going through as a mother. And so just be kind and be accepting of it. And I appreciate you guys all for being here. We're on the last live for Sidney Powell tomorrow until we see a new trial. So her appeal got approved. It's overturned. Her conviction is being overturned. She gets a new trial in 2025. If we see that go live, of course, we're all going to be on it. But if we don't, she's probably going to take a plea, like an insanity plea, and be put in a mental health hospital, which I'm for it if that's what she needs. But tomorrow will be the last live we do on Sidney Powell until we get a new update, which will probably be soon. And then we're going to be covering a new case. And then we're going to continue Jamie calls. We're going to do a little bit of, we're going to mix it up. We're going to piss a little people off. We're going to cover Karen Reed. Oof, baby, I said it. We're going to cover Karen Reed this weekend. We're going to go balls out, walls out. And we're gonna do a vertical too, because you know, people like that. But I appreciate you guys for being here. Thank you for being here and covering the Powell case. I really think it's important to, if we're gonna comment on true crime cases and participate, I think it's important to know all the facts. And I hope, you know, I get a lot of support from like Plunder and people who come on here and provide us their content. And so I can appreciate that. And so I hope you can appreciate that here on my channel. And I know a lot of you do. And I hope to see you here tomorrow night. And then on Saturday, baby, grab your coffee because we're going to be covering a lot of true crime on Saturday. And thank you for being here tonight, all of you in the chat. I see Mary D. I see Debbie, Corso, Augie, my beautiful Augie, Sane, Lily. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Hey, Mary Beth. It's been a shit show, but nonetheless, I appreciate all of you who have stuck around and continue to watch, and just know that I'm here for the true crime rally after midnight. You like that, don't you? But anyways, I'll leave it at that. Tomorrow we will watch sentencing for Sydney, and we'll wait and see if we get a new trial in 2025 here soon. So I appreciate you for being here. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, do all them things. I have a new email. So if you are trying to send me recommendations, not me having to get a new email because of trolls. But yes, I have a new contact. So I will get back to you. If you emailed me on the old email, I will get back to you on the new one. And if you're not in the Discord, then you're not in Discord. You can comment and I will always comment back and we can communicate. So I appreciate you for being here. I hope you guys have a blessed night. I love you. Thank you for being here. I hope to see you guys tomorrow night. And like I said, we have a bunch of true crime this weekend. So I'm looking forward to it. And again, thank you for being here. I'll see you guys later. Bye.